Hi everyone, for ZDNet, I'm Karen Roby with Daphne LaPrance-Ronguet. We're talking today about the race for AI. And Daphne, I think a good place to start would be to talk about, which countries we're comparing here and who's winning.
So a race for AI, as you said, Karen, it's a well-known fact, well-established fact that countries around the world are racing to be leading in the artificial intelligence space. You can see this through various government funding programs, various strategic intent documents that have been published over the last few years. And a new report that came out compares the three regions or superpowers that are considered to be leaders in the space. That's the US, China, and the EU. It's an update on a previous report that was done 2 years ago that looks at various different metrics ranging from access to data, adoption of AI technologies, funding, number of AI startups, and things like that. And the main conclusion of the report is that the US has a very strong lead in AI. China is catching up very rapidly, while the EU keeps falling behind. So if we take a closer look at some of the metrics, one of the most striking ones is definitely funding. The US, sorry, has a very clear lead in funding with a total of $14 billion that were given or injected into AI startups in the US in just 2019. That's $8 billion more than in China. And it's far ahead of the EU, which is at $3.2 billion for that same year. But China, as I said, is catching up in certain fields. For example, in AI research, China sits on almost a third of total AI papers that have been produced, which is showing that China really is increasing its dominance in that space because it used to have a much smaller proportion of those research papers. The EU used to be historically the one that had the strongest lead in research. So China really is developing its capabilities and research power here. And another area that China is making strides in is hardware. If we look at supercomputers at the top 500 list, which is the list of the top 500 most powerful supercomputers around the world, China has twice as many supercomputers in that list as the US. So that's a huge advance for China in the last 2 years. In 2012, it had three times less as that number of supercomputers on the top 500 list. So it's really increasing its capability again at pace. And even though the US has a very strong lead, as I said, the report sort of stresses that that's no reason to rest on your laurels because China really is making strides and catching up very fast.
And you mentioned it, with the EU used to lead in research, Daphne, among other things. So, what is the reasons, cited here for why they're actually falling behind when it comes to AI?
Yes, so as I said, they used to lead on research. China has overtaken the EU for the first time in research, but that's not the only field where the EU is taking a back seat. As I said, the report sort of stresses that the EU is continuously falling behind and has been for a few years now. In simple terms, there's not enough money in the EU. I mentioned funding in the US and in China that are far ahead of funding levels that we can see in the EU that are expected to get even worse as the UK exits the EU, since the UK represents a significant chunk of funding in the region. The lack of money means that a lot of EU entrepreneurs and a lot of researchers that work in AI are tempted to go into regions like the US and China where there are more incentives. So the report calls on more investment from public bodies, but also private companies to invest in their R&D. So yeah, the EU really is falling behind, and one of the reasons that the report puts forward for this lack of AI capabilities on top of funding is what the report writers consider overregulation. They say that in the EU there is a tendency to be wary of AI and to see it as a force for evil, and therefore a desire to regulate AI in ways that are unmatched in the rest of the world, and that can sometimes deter AI entrepreneurs from working or developing AI systems altogether. So for the researchers, this overregulation of AI is not innovation friendly. If we look at the GDPR, for example, the last few years have seen fines increase significantly, and companies get fined ever bigger amounts of money by EU regulators, and these amounts are only expected to grow even more. So for the researchers who wrote that report, that's an example of something that could really stop and inhibit AI entrepreneurs, AI startups, the whole AI ecosystem from developing at pace like it does in other countries or regions.
Yeah, and Daphne, but as we know, with so much when it comes to tech, that regulation is needed, to some extent here. So it may actually be a good thing that they're holding back a bit to see how this plays out.
Yes, that's definitely one take on the subject, to say that overregulation is not innovation friendly. The EU, for its part, has really pitched regulation as something that's really needed and sort of prides itself really on being the regulator of AI. They published a white paper a year ago on artificial intelligence, suggesting ways to regulate the technology. Recently, the EU's human rights watchdog, the Council of Europe, imposed a ban on facial recognition or on applications of facial recognition that might be discriminatory. So for the EU, this is really a way to differentiate itself from other regions like the US and China, where AI might be developed in a more unregulated way. It's perhaps the way that the EU has to carve a spot or a place for itself in that race. Perhaps it's not leading on dollars or on number of AI startups, but it really wants to position itself as this world regulator of AI in the same way that it did with GDPR, really. So the idea is really to develop this sort of GDPR for AI, and hopefully to have regions and countries around the world follow suit and follow the EU's lead there. So yes, you could say that in a way that EU is falling behind in the AI race. Whether that is something that is bad, given the reasons that it is also up for debate for sure.
All right, Daphne. Well, we'll see how this all plays out. Of course, much more on AI, what all of you all need to know on ZDNet. We hope you'll check it out there. Thanks for watching.